about sort of the slot where I keep you awake. Actually, I have two talks already. So I guess I come from quite a different perspective. I'm a cultural geographer, I'm a social scientist, I'm not an animal scientist or any veterinary training, and nor am I an economist, but I have become interested in trying to approach all the work I'd done on animal welfare, which was quite substantial actually. I'd worked on welfare quality and did all the studies of the retail supply chains in the UK, so I interviewed like 60 people across the UK about how the supply chain works. And then I also wrote up the report across Europe, so I had a good understanding of how the meat supply chain worked. But I'm now kind of coming back to that work and thinking, so how can we think more generally about how we would approach a new way of tackling farm animal welfare that draws on perhaps some of my theoretical interests that I've always had as a cultural geographer. So I hope you'll hear some different ideas that maybe are not commonly discussed when you hear typical talks about animal welfare. So I'm going to begin by thinking a bit more about the challenge of farm animal welfare. I mean, I've sort of said a few things recently. I'm starting to do some work on lab animal welfare, which is also giving me the chance of looking back at farm animal welfare with a new perspective. The challenge on this year I'm going to talk about is this thing about animal becoming food. And then I'll talk about my approach to studying farm animal welfare, and then talk about some work that I've been doing with Henry Buller on looking at the economisation of farm animal welfare. By that I'm really talking about how actually the economy gets created. What are those theories that come together, the materialities, the problematics of different kinds of animal species, different kinds of cultures of what we might like to eat, how those actually come together to create what becomes a market, and then the technologies of like the state and legislation, and how that assembles together to create this environment around farm animal welfare that we're familiar with, but also, by taking that perspective, how we could tweak it to maybe bring about some change. Then I'm going to talk a bit about farm animal welfare assessment, a kind of an ethnographic passage, because I think one of the things we haven't spoken about much today are the actual animals, so I'll talk a little bit more about, hopefully you'll hear the idea of what actually happens when you visit a farm, and then conclude with what my general approach is, that I think we need to think about how we can get to know animals differently. That's the key message that I'm trying to tease out from these different perspectives. So to begin with, animals becoming food. So perhaps most significantly to work to improve farm animal welfare is the unique challenge because of the material transformations of the farm animal's body, from living animal to dead carcass to cooked, processed meat, egg, milk, etc. I'm thinking here in comparison to pets or experimental animals or wild animals. People are encountering meat or milk far more than they are encountering living, industrialised farm animals in food production. And the representations of farm animals most are familiar with are like cartoon-like anthropomorphic drawings in children's books, with perhaps live encounters with farm animals, typically at a petting farm. When I told my students we were going to a farm, they were like, is it a petting farm? Now that's the typical encounter with the farm. Or textual or visual descriptions on food packaging that appeals to naturalistic, sentimental imaginary about how animals live. Interestingly, it's become the preserve of the NGOs to draw attention to how industrialised farm animals are actually living their lives, rather than an open government-led discussion about the complexities of feeding a human population with animal-based products, whilst not neglecting the well-being of the farm animals consumed. A farm animal welfare policy is as much about food policy. Farm animal bodies are still sentient beings when the effects of animal-based products are discussed in macro food policy issues, about how their consumption contributes to population health concerns, or when their production impacts negatively on the environment, and when the resource demands animal production places on the planet raises concerns about food security between different global players. But how do people know farm animals? How do they know the food they eat? Meanwhile, government approaches to tackle farm animal welfare improvements have looked increasingly to the quality food turn and the rise of ethical consumption practices over the last decade. This is an aesthetic practice that bundles together politics, ethics, norms in various ways through different personal eating encounters. And indeed, some retail corporate social responsibility strategies, as we've been hearing, have responded with the integration of tighter farm animal welfare in food quality assurance schemes as the way to integrate and monitor that legal requirements are being met and perhaps exceeded. Always supported and aided by the work of farm animal welfare scientists offering clear scientific evidence on farm animal experiences. This work is focused on addressing farm animal welfare issues which the supply chains could respond to, importantly, and integrate into production systems. There's been a tendency of trying to think about how you can put these into the supply chains rather than some kind of just thinking outside the box about what you might like to try and achieve. Because if they are integrated into the production systems, or they are something that's relevant to the market, then you hopefully might be to sell these down the line to consumers at a premium. There's no doubt that the presence of farm animal welfare as an explicit or implicit food product attribute has been a highly significant feature, for in effect it has proven that animal welfare improvements are something that people are willing to invest in. And yes, this does demonstrate the success of animal welfare science, the efforts of animal welfare NGOs, and the activities of food companies themselves in collectively raising the visual profile of higher welfare products in stores. We may see shortcomings in this, but still something has changed, something has happened. But essentially it is farm animal welfare becoming a product attribute of food quality, in much the same way as free from, or luxury, or low fat. And here I'm being devil's advocate, but this approach to farm animal welfare is different from, say, lab animal welfare or pet welfare, because the life experiences of farm animals are so strongly shaped by food cultures, their second life as edible flesh post-mortem, or the products they produce, e.g. milk and eggs. So today I want to discuss what a cultural economic approach can offer analysis, understanding and explanation for farm animal welfare practice in our society today, because of how it places knowledge-making practices, this is what I'm interested in, knowledge for how knowledge is produced, as internal to the activities of the market. The market only is achievable because of sets of knowledges that have been generated by society. This is an approach to understand the political representation of farm animals in our society. It works to analyse the specificities of what is currently happening. So I'm less interested in the general, more interested in the specifics, and to remain open to the complexity of human interactions with non-human animal bodies that we farm for food right through the supply chain network. So this is also an approach that isn't trying to leave the animals out of this, but is interested in the interactions with living animals and the interactions with animals as they become meat and edible flesh. So this is an integrated approach that studies how new knowledges and meanings around farm animals, and how farm animals live, could be living, and how to make improvement to their lives, whether stock person, consumer or scientist, are working off and with each other to support the development of farm animal welfare as a cultural phenomenon, with significant material outcomes in the quality of farm animal lives and the quality of food for human consumers. I'm interested in this macro assembling of all these things happening together, rather than looking at things in isolation. So following this line of inquiry, I'm interested in trying to explain and understand the following, which may be quite unusual ways of approaching the question. But how, when and with whom do non-human farm animals become a body that generates concern to care for them? What are the spaces and the places where this happens? Which then leads on to care becoming a political matter in all cases. In all cases, because I think when anyone has a sense that something is worth caring for, even if it's a one-to-one, there is a politics involved in the fact that that is being recognised. And to equally understand how and when it becomes a body that is neglected or overlooked, and I'm using neglect here in a very kind of generalised sense here. So how can the ability to respond with caremaking practices around animal bodies across different sites be facilitated, responsive and attuned to aspirations to do things differently for animals within these different locations? I'm really trying to think about how does change happen, what is happening in that encounter with animals, and maybe some of the problems about what kinds of encounters are more typical than others. We can immediately recognise that where politically and legally animals are recognised as sentient beings, there still remains plenty of illustrations where farm animals still experience neglect, whether from disinterested meat eaters and milk drinkers, overstretched stock persons, or food retailers that don't position farm animal welfare highly in their CSR strategy, etc. But how do consumers know what is a good life for chickens, cows or pigs? The most common welfare criteria to be adopted by the market, featuring in retail CSR statements, identifiable on food packaging within some product lines, and were frequently discussed in a cross-European study of retailer practices, related to farm animal welfare ideas that related to animal naturality. It's animal naturality that is still dominantly what's being discussed, and many of us, I'm sure, recognise that is out of touch with the realities. Animal confinement was also discussed, and stocking density. So these ideas reflect the dominant understandings and feelings that surround farm animal welfare amongst engaged citizens, and I guess we have to wonder, are we happy to continue with those being the dominant impressions? But they can be at odds with what is achievable in the marketplace, at odds with what some of the animal science is suggesting, and also avoid non-market friendly aspects of the production process, notably slaughter. You know, if we left it to what consumers typically thought about, then slaughter really would not be featuring at all. Which is an argument for why we need more than just the market happening, but as I will go on to say. So what I will argue through drawing on examples from fieldwork is that how the culture of concern around animals plays out in different farm animal species across different spaces and for different food animal products has both supported and hindered in different ways the potential to sell various food products with animal welfare as a product attribute. We have a very mixed picture of what is actually out there that can sell with any higher welfare attributes. And this raises the critical question that Henry Buller and I have articulated, that we need to be more critical about and alert to what farm animal welfare we are working towards. Yes, the culture of concern is present, but where it is bringing meaningful change is not felt everywhere, but is more specifically linked to certain product species consumer priorities. Can the standard of animal welfare that market activity supports and encourages match the aspirations and imaginations that society holds for the lives of farm animals, which is what Richard demonstrated to us in his kind of results. So now I'm going to discuss this in relation to this cultural economic analysis of the free-range egg market. We've heard quite a lot about free-range eggs today, and I guess I'm going to kind of continue in that vein, really. So I'm going to be talking about this economisation of farm animals. So the argument in the paper that Henry and I wrote about, and this is probably quite a new term, economisation, is something that kind of is a process that happens. That's what I guess I want you to kind of have in your mind, that it's a process. So the argument in our paper was that what welfare is depends increasingly on how it is enrolled in economisation processes. Although we might think that things are happening outside of the market, you know, that the market is not in complete control, the state is doing a lot, it still seems that a lot of legislation is always in relationship to the broader economy. And when we talk about this economisation process, we're talking of everything from kind of a production system, redesign, to marketing campaigns. All these things are linked together in this kind of broader process. In this paper, we analyse some of the vast array of scientific and commercial technologies as practices that are enacting multiple farm animal realities through the process of marketisation. And through our analysis, we offer a critical analytical perspective on what has happened in the past, is happening now, and may happen in the future, so as to remain alert to how animal welfare is being shaped, modified, or co-modified, really. It's something that's happening with the animals themselves and how we work with them by technical, social, material, and institutional arrangements in this economisation process. So this is a quote which of how Caliscan and Callon describe the process of the concept of economisation. So the processes that constitute the behaviours, organisations, institutions, and more generally the objects in a particular society. The objects, of course, here we're talking about are animals, which are tentatively and often controversially qualified by scholars and or lay people as economic. So in many ways, lots of the discussion that's happened today around how the EU is working, how DEFRA is working, how the economy, the different kinds of ethical frameworks, all these are playing into how this world around farm animals is being created and how we are approaching farm animals. My own talk today still is contributing to that general ways of thinking and making meaningful the area of farm animal welfare. So in this way, doing farm animal welfare becomes a broad array of techniques, practices and materialities to meet reasoning present in the market, rather than in the sole interest of improving animal welfare. So economisation, they argue, as I said, consists of these three key agents. So the establishment of theories of the economy. So those of you that are interested in economics, be critical of those about how they conceal and hide different ways of thinking about how the world could be. Because actually they are also working together to create this market that we're of. And I include my own work in this. The constitution of institutional and technical arrangements promoting action and cognition. So we have government bodies, we have NGOs, we have retailers, we have farm assurance schemes, we have academics who are working to maybe try and put some spokes in the wheels or kind of offer new ways to think about things. But these different institutions, we have the veterinary establishment, which is a kind of particularly influential farm animals, how they're all working to think particular ways and practice different ways of working with farm animals. And thirdly, the establishment of things which are valued and whose materiality influences the modes of evaluation that are possible and their outcomes. Now here is where we have the farm animals themselves coming in, the different species. Chickens, you know broilers are very different from laying hens. Cattle, dairy cattle different from beef cattle. Pigs. But then we start to get into all those different breeds of different pigs and how, you know, the one that's the intensive breed is very different from the Gloucester Old Spot. So we start to bring in the complexities of those animals that we're working, and then that raises questions about the lengths of lives and how long they should be living for and what point of death and how the materiality of how long they have lived and when their life should end. Anyway, all these three things kind of come together in this process of economisation. So the critical point for us is that growing scientific and popular concern for the welfare of egg-laying hens over the last 30 years has gradually exposed significant shortcomings in the hen's experience as an egg layer within an industrialised production system. That has happened within our culture. You know, if you go back to Ruth Harrison's book, Animal Machines, and then the Bramble Report, and what's happened since then, as we've seen the state of, you know, this has happened through our society. So, looking at the free-range egg. So I'm going to begin by looking at the contemporary free-range barn, where specific chicken-human practices have evolved through a long, complex history of animal-human entanglements. People have been farming chickens free-range for some time, and many of those practices have then moved on into the kind of intensive house system. And the commercial, industrial, free-range hen production is in fact quite a still recent phenomenon. So, talking specifically about intensive free-range poultry houses are dimly lit to reduce pecking damage. A poultry assessor, in this example I'm going to put up, speaks about the practicalities of stepped lighting and hen welfare. This is a common practice because egg-laying hens need light changes as day lengths to stimulate daily egg production. However, there are notable poor welfare problems associated with hen welfare when changes in light levels occur. So if light levels suddenly fall, it can create smothering. And at the other end of the light spectrum, high intensity light is linked to increased onset of injurious pecking in flocks. So this is talking to an assessor. Step lighting systems or automatic dimming systems we insist on in the laying house, the interviewer. So how long does that dimming process last for? A minimum of 15 minutes, so the hens, have time to prepare themselves. Now I'm sure this is the accreditation body, will have arguments on that, but there is a danger of hen smothering issues. Why? You know, this is a naive question from the interviewer, who doesn't know much about hens. Because the hens panic. They think they're going to panic if the lights go straight off like that. So they think, oh yes, they just sort of squat down and that's it. So this is some of the kind of the details of how working with these animals is actually managed with this particular flock, this particular strain of hens. Because not all hens respond the same to light levels either. So welfare and breed selection and egg productivity are weighed up against each other. From what the assessor describes, there's still much they're learning about how to successfully rear free-range hens intensively. notably very different from the flock size in a traditional backyard environment. So in this example, the economisation of hen welfare is generating and innovating new care practices, new hens, different science that can support the industrial experimentation with higher welfare in large-scale production units. This is not the idealised and often romanticised happy hen welfare of a singular or small flock of hens that might appear on food packaging, but rather an illustration of how the materiality of hen biology and behaviour actively participates, if we can use that term, in constructing high welfare as an area of economic concern. If the hens get smothered, they will die. We lose the economic unit evaluation. But this is like just a little example of the detailed intricacies of putting lots of this stuff into practice that too often is being left out of the way we might discuss this topic. So moving on, so talking about the how this economy performs. So this is a slide which we're kind of thinking about how the free-range egg has become pacified. Pacified in terms of, if we, because it's interesting that hens we have managed to keep them in very small cages, which we haven't to the same extent with, say, beef cattle. Okay, so we have to think about how, sadly, the hen has lent itself to some of these practices that we now think are just unacceptable. How it's become possible to pacify it. Because it originally also was a jungle fowl animal running around in Southeast Asia, and look how far it has come. I'm going to skip through some of these, because otherwise we'll be here all day. But it's also really invaluable to think about the activisation of a concern for hens. That hasn't come out of nowhere, it's come out of our society, and to what great effect. So we see the initial emergence of free-range eggs in the late 1980s and early 1990s, which prompted partly by producers eager to promote their distinctive production systems, partly by retailers keen to find a means of segmenting what has traditionally been a heavily standardised egg market under the old British Egg Marketing Board. This is where it's interesting how it became an interest in segmenting the market rather than maybe directly about animal welfare in terms of how it started off. Particularly trying to revitalise the shell egg market after the salmonella scare in the 1980s. And so we saw the first campaigns against battery hens as this new market started to develop, and the early proliferation of free-range eggs in supermarkets. At that time it was largely unregulated, however. Different definitions and standards applied within production systems, which led to quite a lot of consumer confusion. And as we're now in a time where we have a lot more standardisation about what is a free-range system, which maybe doesn't align that much with what consumers imagine, and also, as we know, has problems about actual whether animal welfare is being met in the standards which we would hope for. So thirdly, to think about the marketing counters and these social material technologies of mediation. So responding both to the exhibited consumer preference as well as their own ethical branding, a number of major food retailers have now stopped selling cage eggs at all. Hence we move from an earlier situation of choice facilitation involving such technological devices like labelling, differential packaging and range or store branding to one of choice editing, and what is in effect a removal of consumer choice within individual stores. And this is a quote from Tesco's agricultural manager, which is she wrote a chapter in her book, Michelle Waterman, you may be aware of it. And she says, everyone understands or at least has an idea of what free-range means when applied to eggs or meat chicken. It means birds that have access to the outdoors, so they have grass and natural daylight and fresh air. We can show pictures and explain the welfare benefits relatively easily. For this reason, companies that specialise in top-of-the-range products can sell themselves on being all free-range or all organic and have higher cost structures by appealing their relatively welfare or at least ethically knowledgeable customers. So we also see, the free-range image is such a great selling point, and it's a shame that some of the other species don't have something that can so easily be communicated to society. And I think we have to recognise that. The limitations that other species are suffering. That it's not, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. We have to get back to the specificities at large in some of the challenges. And this is just insight to, as we've said before, that the success of the kind of differentiation using the kind of the EU labelling on shells. And you see, once that differentiation starts to occur, then you actually see an increase in the free-range shells. And then fifthly, market design and maintenance. Not wanting to forget the power of regulators here and what they can do. So, you know, European Commission very active in designing the segmentation of eggs, market of segmentation in eggs, and the forthcoming ban, which now happened, of caged eggs. So their work has been, as we've already discussed, has been very important. I mean, maybe this is something that we're much more familiar in talking about, and less so some of those other earlier points they discussed. Okay, I better move on. That's just like the cruiser. So there are I guess there's some implications here about how we think about welfare assessment, a particular concern for eggs. We're in a market now where almost free range is the de facto higher welfare, aren't we? And there are still problems at large in that system. That's where society is, so we have to work out how we actually start to communicate maybe a different message. Are we willing to actually embrace that challenge? Because it is masking more pressing welfare issues. So this is where, I guess, the idea of an output-based assessment may have some opportunities, but also is such at odds with the knowledge levels of where the majority of consumers are at, who are thinking about naturality. I don't think we should shy away from these communication challenges. I think we need to learn how to know animals differently. Okay, I think I'm going to have to miss out the bit about farm animal welfare assessment, but there was a lovely quote about the experience of going around a pig unit. Unless you want to hear a little bit about pigs feeling cold. Yes? Do you want to try? Just give you the little quote. Yeah. It just puts you in the barn. We haven't heard. Okay. We arrive at another farm, an intensive pig unit. The same assessors know the people farming here. They have an outdoor reared unit, but today it's their intensive fattening unit that is being assessed. The farmers admit during the paperwork stage, as questions are raised about the herd health plan, that they have a problem with tail biting and are trying to address it. So following again 45 minutes spent studying the paperwork, which is the standard in an assessment, we leave to begin a walk around the pig sheds. For biosecurity reasons, it is the youngest pigs on the unit that we visit first. We start with very young pigs who arrived the night before. These pigs are huddling, clambering on top of each other to get away from us as we enter the shed. They are not playing or inquisitive and appear frightened of humans. Then we are told they only arrived at morning, travelling overnight on a lorry, where they no doubt got cold. It was a cold night last night. When I read this back to myself recently, I thought, my gosh, all these cold nights we've been having for ages, what have pigs been travelling in? This information is seen as important by the farm assessor. His reporting will take into account for this contingency. So contingency stated as fact. We walk through rooms with pens and pens of pigs. We start to see indicators of tail biting and scratches, bite marks on the pig flanks. None of the severely injured pigs are here. We see them later in the hospital pen. The assessor and the farmers discuss many different potential reasons for the tail biting. The farmers explain, with the help of their vet, what they are doing to try and stop it. Again, the cause, like the frightened young pigs, is not solely related to what the farmers are doing. For example, the feed comes from the contractors. Perhaps that's why they're biting tails, because the feed is the wrong mineral mix. The price of grain is high at the moment. The inspection reveals problems that will at first appear to constitute a non-compliance, but which are understood to be not easily remedied, indicating how challenging the process of farm animal assessment becomes. In this end, this particular pig farm with tail biting did get its farm assurance stamp because it demonstrated in a 60-day window that the farmers, vets and contractors had produced a management plan aimed at addressing the issue. In conversation, this assessor contrasted it with another farm where he immediately removed certification. On that farm, milky dairy cows had inexplicably poor body condition, which indicated to him a big cattle feeding problem. So to understand why cases of poor welfare can be treated differently, we must recognise how farm assessment procedures work to perform an objective assessment within highly varied farming contexts. And I guess that's just a little point to make about, as we move to outcome-based assessment, what actually is happening on the farm at the moment and what may be lost from that process. So I guess just my last point is just, when I think about this approach to how we tackle farm animal welfare, to me it's about creating the opportunity for knowing farm animals differently. And that's not through kind of didactic teaching necessarily, but it's through providing different encounters. Whether it's human-animal encounters for real, or the opportunity being there when you even eat something, that there is a different encounter with that animal which that meat came from. So this is more performative approach that actually, I always want to call it an embodied food policy approach that puts the bodily experiences, for it is food that you are putting in your body in effect, and the relationship with that thing that you are eating, that is really at the heart of this debate.
Great, thank you.